Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to welcome His Excellency Secretary General to this meeting. I thank him for his words that were responsible. I also like to thank Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs for her briefing. The guarantors of the Astana format at the fourth round of their meetings that was hosted by the Kazakh capital on the 3rd and 4th of May 2017. The guarantors of the Astana format in 2017 agreed on establishing de-escalation zones in my country as a temporary measure, as my friend, the representative of Russia, has said. The guarantors, among them the Turkish regime, at the end of that meeting in Astana, announced that they would be firmly committed to the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and they agreed, among other things, on the following, and I quote from the official Security Council document. I am quoting from your own document. Taking all necessary measures to ensure that the ceasefire is observed by all parties. 1. Second, taking all measures to continue fighting against Daesh, Al-Nusra Front, Fath al-Sham, and all individuals, groups, and entities associated with Al-Qaeda or Daesh, as they were designated by the Security Council, inside and outside the de-escalation zones. 3. The guarantors, the three guarantors, among them the Turkish regime, by the 4th of July 2017, must take measures to separate armed opposition from the terrorist groups that I've just mentioned. The government of my country, on the same day, on the 3rd of May 2017, on the same day, my government announced its support of the Russian initiative on the de-escalation zones to stop the bloodshed of the Syrian people and to ensure a return to normal life as much as possible. The government stressed that it would continue its war against terrorism, namely Daesh, Al-Nusra Front, and other associated terrorist groups. On the 17th of September 2018, the Sochi Agreement provided for the establishment of a demilitarized zone in the Idleb governorate and parts of rural Aleppo and Hama, and the Turkish regime would commit to withdrawing armed groups and terrorist groups, including Al-Nusra Front and other associated groups from this area. It would demilitarize those groups by the 15th of October 2018 and ensure normal traffic on the M4 and M5 highways by the end of 2018. My government supported and welcomed this initiative that is time-bound and temporary by nature. It was the result of intensive consultations between the Syrian Arab Republic and the Russian Federation, and we stressed once again that we will continue combating terrorism to liberate every inch of our territories, whether through military operations or through local reconciliations. This is also a formal document by your Council on the Sochi Agreement. Mr. President, although we and our friends and other countries demanded that the Turkish regime honor its commitments that I've just mentioned, within the set timeframes, those set in the Astana understandings and the Sochi agreement, the Erdogan regime reneged on honoring those commitments. It and the terrorist groups associated with it used those de-escalation agreements to bolster their presence in Syria and in the areas adjacent to Turkey primarily, and to impose a terrorist reality at the expense of our people in Idlib and rural Hama and Latakia. They've been suffering from terrorist crimes. Those crimes affected humanitarian workers, civilians, and everybody who dared to reject the practices of those groups. And you've seen the demonstrations in the northwest protesting against the practices of terrorist groups that are supported by Turkey, those terrorist groups that are plundering, looting, kidnapping, detaining, torturing, raping, imposing taxes, stealing produce, stealing archaeological pieces, smuggling people, and selling humanitarian aid. And now, you know, after 2 years of the Astana understandings and after a year and a half of the Sochi agreement, the Turkish regime turned the observation posts on Syrian territory, which were supposed to control the activities of terrorists, preventing terrorists from committing those terrorist acts, and thereby repelling any aggression on the positions of the Syrian Arab Army and the Russian forces. So those observation posts were turned into operation rooms and ways to support terrorist organizations. The proof is that the Turkish soldiers that were killed were located far away from those observation posts where they were supporting terrorism. Undersecretary General said that Turkish forces played a supporting role in the operations of terrorists against Syrian forces in Sarakeb. Undersecretary General said that in her briefing today. The Syrian Arab Army and its allies, based on its constitutional and national duty, based on Security Council resolutions on counterterrorism, in implementation of the Astana agreement, the Astana understandings and the Sochi agreement, they launched a military operation to rid the people in Aleppo and Idlib and the surrounding areas from terrorist organizations and to restore the authority of the state, to restore the rule of law to these areas that are controlled by Al-Gabha, Al-Nusra Front, rather. The latest reports, namely Report S/202/53, and this is the report that I have with me today. It is the 25th report of the analytical support team. I will read to you a paragraph of this report. Governorate of Idlib, which is in the northwest of Syria, is still under the control of groups associated with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, not opposition. This governorate is also hosting Daesh fighters and their families that moved there. The border area with Al-Anbar governorate in Iraq is a safe haven for terrorists. This is a paragraph from the report of the analytical support team, the 25th report of the analytical support team. The Syrian Arab Army and its allies succeeded in liberating large swathes of land, including 140 towns and villages, from the control of cannibals, the sponsors of international terrorism that immersed themselves in the values and concepts of humanitarian international law in schools and academies of terrorism and extremism. And then you demand that the Syrian army goes back to the lines of 2018. So after all these efforts in counterterrorism, you're now demanding the Syrian army should go back to the lines of 2018. Mr. President, my country condemns in the strongest terms the practices of the Turkish regime and the aggression against Syria in support of terrorism, entertaining the illusion of reviving the unjust Ottoman Sultanate. We categorically reject claims by the Turkish regime that its aggression against my country are a form of self-defense or an implementation, or a form of implementing the Adna agreement concluded between our two countries in 1998, or under any other pretenses. As we're speaking of self-defense, you know that the Committee on the Charter has ended its work 2 days ago. The Mexican delegation have proposed a very good idea, namely, not misinterpreting Article 51 of the Charter. Not misusing and not misinterpreting Article 51 of the Charter. No one objected to that proposal except for the Turkish delegation. The Turkish delegation opposed that Mexican proposal. Why? It is the Erdogan regime that violated the Adna agreement and violated its commitment under the Astana understanding and the Sochi agreement. It disregarded good neighborliness, Security Council resolutions on counterterrorism. I told you yesterday they even used water as a terrorist weapon. Yesterday they cut water supplies from Al-Hasaka town that hosts 600,000 civilians that were deprived of water. This regime has been recruiting, supporting, training, and arming thousands of terrorists, including foreign terrorist fighters that have come from more than 100 countries, according to UN reports. Turkish intelligence waited for them at Turkish airports, allowed them to infiltrate the joint borders to my countries. They planned for their crimes and provided military, political, and media support. Then it united them, integrated them with their own forces, and used them in its aggression in the northeast and the northwest of my country. Then some of them were transferred to Libya and the Horn of Africa. My country rejects categorically the use by the Erdogan regime of Syrian civilians as fuel in its hysterical war on my country, or using civilians as a way to bring pressure to bear on European countries, to blackmail those European countries, and to drag NATO into its childish adventures, or to receive ways to facilitate the accession of Turkey to the European Union, or allowing Turkish citizens to enter European territory without visas. We call upon European countries to honor its commitments according to international law and human rights instruments, and we call upon those European countries not to get involved in shameful deals, in political bazaars with the rogue Turkish regime at the expense of the Syrian people. Mr. President, in the past few days, we've witnessed the fighting of the Turkish army, and as we know, Erdogan got rid of the leadership of the Turkish army in 2016, claiming that they orchestrated a coup. The Turkish army was fighting with terrorist organizations, Takfiri terrorist organizations in Libya and Syria, in violation of international law, the Charter, and Security Council resolutions. It's regrettable that some are still commending the Turkish regime, disregarding its crimes. Among those crimes is turning those humanitarian crossings that are mentioned in Resolution 25/4 into passageways for thousands of troops and military assets, including foreign terrorist fighters and all sorts of arms, including weapons, chemical weapons. We are going to continue fighting terrorism on our country. Idlib is in Syria. It's not in California. It's not in Germany or Belgium or France. My country combat terrorism on our own territory, not on foreign territory, and we are committed to use all legitimate tools to defend our own people, to defend the unity of Syria, to defend our sovereignty and our national ownership. The Security Council must honor its responsibilities to put an end to the adventure of the Erdogan regime that threatened international and regional peace and security, as the Secretary General has said. This is what the Charter and international law states. In conclusion, those countries that called for convening this meeting, I would like them to answer those questions. The presence of the Turkish forces on the territories of my country, does this constitute military aggression and a form of occupation or no? The Turkish regime sought to impose sought to raise the Turkish flag, sought to change the names of our streets, and sought to impose Turkish curricula, sought to loot our resources. Is that in accordance with international law or no? Have your approaches to combat terrorism and to maintain international peace and security, have those changed according to the Charter, or do you want to change the Charter into a document that is controversial? Is there still a remnant of credibility in this Council that allows member states that entrusted you with those powers to trust you? It is clear, it has become apparent, Mr. President, that the aim of this meeting is to target the Astana format and nothing more, nothing else, targeting the Astana format and distorting the concept of international law. If you do really care about international law, as my British colleague has said, his country wouldn't have invaded Iraq. It wouldn't have destroyed Iraq. It wouldn't have killed 1 million Iraqis. It wouldn't have stolen its resources. It wouldn't have destroyed the infrastructure in Iraq. If there were international law at that time that prevented the invasion of Iraq by the United States, we wouldn't have been in this dilemma right now. Thank you, Mr. President.